The following stories were submitted to me directly. Story 1. I remember when we first moved to Colorado Springs. It was about 20 years ago when I was still in high school. I'm well into my 30s now. I'd never really been much of a believer in the supernatural side of things, mostly because both of my parents are atheists. My parents raised me by teaching me not to believe in anything without evidence. This information is important because the series of events that I am about to describe changed my life and how I view the world. I was around 16 years old when we moved to this semi-old ranch-style house, probably built sometime in the 80s. Being an energetic teenager, I was excited about making new friends, starting a new life, hiking and trailing the woods right behind our house. But nothing could prepare me for what was about to come. Now, my first encounter with this happened when I walked with my dog Bruno in the woods. I still remember that evening vividly because it was the last thing I expected would ever happen in my life. It also set up the following occurrences. It was a beautiful evening. I soaked in the smell of nature, the woody feeling of being within the trees, something I had missed out on a lot living in the middle of the city in the early part of my life. Everything was going along perfectly until it was time to get back home. I remember seeing my dog Bruno behaving unusually. The sun was just now setting, and we were making our way back home through the narrow trail that split the woods in half. "What's wrong, buddy? You seem a little scared," I asked him. I could tell that Bruno was uneasy by his body language, and I knew something was wrong. We continued walking down the path when all of a sudden, it hit me like a truck. The unseasonable chill struck my body so hard I was left paralyzed on the ground for a couple of seconds, not knowing what to do. I have never been so scared in my life, ever. I could feel my body trembling vigorously. Bruno was whimpering, jumping around as he tried to get off the leash and bolt. But my hand was frozen. Then, for a brief moment, I saw something in the corner of my eye. It was looking at us just a few meters into the woods. At first, I tried convincing myself it was a wild animal, possibly a bear. But no, even I knew I was lying to myself. I could see the glowing eyes as it moved slowly away from us, its tall frame suddenly getting lower to the ground before running off and disappearing into the woods. That was my first encounter with the creature, one that left me wiping off tears as I ran back home. That night, my mum made lasagna, but I could not even eat it, even though it was one of my favourite meals. The rancid smell from the creature still lingered in my nostrils. It was nauseating. The waves of nausea added to my misery of what I had just seen. I could not eat at all. And my parents noticed. They asked what was going on, and I was hesitant at first, but in the end I explained to them what had happened. My dad tried to convince me it was a bear or something similar, and said he would contact the local wildlife service to look into it for us. That night, I struggled to sleep, especially being an only child in my room alone. The next few weeks, things went on rather normally, and I was starting to feel more comfortable again. Maybe my parents were right. Maybe I was caught up in the moment, and I started to see things and I needed to loosen up a little bit more. One time, I started to feel hunger, like never before. I was eating fine and everything, but it was a different type of hunger, an insatiable kind, and I did not know why. I started to gain a little bit of extra weight. I would make sure to keep a late-night snack in my room to eat as the night went on. One Friday, things were a little bit different. I woke up at around 2 a.m. to grab a snack, but since I had gotten home late from swimming practice, I had forgotten to put some in my room. I now had to walk a few meters to the kitchen to get something to calm my raging hunger, albeit for the moment. I opened the fridge door quickly scouring through the options. My bare feet were sticking to the cold floor, and I could not wait to get back to bed. I grabbed a box of leftover pizza and placed it in the microwave to warm. As I waited, something terrible happened. The unmistakable foul smell I had encountered a few weeks ago hit me once again, and I knew it was back. The houses in my neighborhood were well spaced, and the trees made it so that you could not easily see what was happening outside. I immediately turned off the microwave and stood still in the dark. My heart was beating hard and fast. I could hear it through my chest, almost about to pop out. There was an eerie silence, except for the occasional snores coming from my dad's room. But I stood calm and listening. I had the feeling that something was watching me. After about 3 minutes without action, I decided to make my way back to bed slowly. But before I could even make my first step, the creature walked right in front of the living room window. It was an experience that I would not wish on my worst enemy. I stood there watching it, wondering what to do. It was dark outside, and the light from the moon that managed to penetrate through the trees was the only thing that enabled me to see its shadow in the window. It was tall, seemingly unhairless, and with long, sharp claws. Its glowing red eyes penetrated through the curtains as if staring right into my soul. I was shaken and slowly started to walk back to my room. I was sure it was going to come into the house that night, and I was ready to scream. As soon as I turned the corner, I sprinted across the hallway and into my room. But I could hear it running on the roof as well, trotting like a horse with what sounded like hooves. And then, just like that, it was gone. Everything went back to normal. A few seconds later, my mum came into my room to see what was going on. She found me sweating profusely on my bed, and she could tell something was seriously wrong with me. The next morning, I was taken to the doctor's office for a checkup to see if I was developing any mental conditions. But the doctor said I was fine, and it was just the stress of what was causing everything to go wrong. Over the next couple of months, I tried to explain to my parents that something was following me. But I could not prove it to them, so I had to deal with the issue myself. I did not bother explaining anything to my friends either. It was just the internet and I. I tried to search for answers, but I could never get anything concrete, especially since I could not make an accurate description of my problem at that time. Every post I came across was about vampires or werewolves, but I knew my case was different. My final encounter with the beast was the reason why we moved out of Colorado Springs. My parents had left town for a couple of days, and my cousin got called over to help me take care of the house in their absence. She was already in her 20s by that time, but we were close friends. I told her about what happened, and even though she was skeptical, she was much more open to hearing what I was saying. One night, we had just gone to bed, when a loud bang coming from the kitchen woke us up. At first, my cousin thought it was a burglar or something, but I knew better. I could feel the signs. The acrid stench filled the house as we both hid inside the closet holding hands. Her heart was beating so fast, I could hear it from where I stood. There was a moment of silence before the creature continued walking towards our room. My cousin held my hand tighter. She wanted to pull out her phone and call my parents, but I told her not to as the light would reveal our location. The slow, heavy footsteps came to a stop in front of my bedroom door. I could hear it, breathing heavily, and now the smell was even more pungent. Hot bile rose through my gut and filled my mouth as I struggled to keep myself from vomiting. Then, with a loud bang, the door was kicked open from the outside. We peeped through the louvers, and there it stood, watching the room. It was the first and last time I ever saw the creature. A long, uneven tongue hung out of its mouth in between long fangs. It was emaciated and looked a little bit like a skeleton with bits of rotten skin covering its body. I could tell it was tall by the way it was hunched. We remained silent and stood in the closet for almost 2 hours. When the chilling feeling and stench were gone, I knew the creature was out of the house. When my parents got back, they found that something had broken the kitchen door. My cousin was terrified. She helped me get out of that place. And since then, I have not seen the beast again. Before I continue to the next story, I just want to say thank you for choosing to watch this video, and I hope you're enjoying my narration. If you are, please show your appreciation by liking this video, leaving a comment, and if you don't already, subscribing to this channel. Story 2. We come across many situations and events in life, and some of them are utterly uncanny and terrifying. They completely change our lives. Unfortunately for me, I too faced such a situation. Luckily for me, I survived it. David, Robert, and I had been friends since childhood. Every year we took a vacation together. It might have been because we were getting older, but we all wanted something a little less adventurous than our usual getaways. We needed to get out of the city and into nature. A memory came back to me I hadn't had for a long time. My grandfather had a cabin somewhere up in Tennessee. He often used to visit this place alone to enjoy the beauty of nature and find peace. Strangely, my grandfather went missing one day when he was on vacation there. I brought it up to the guys, telling them that we might need to spruce the place up a bit when we arrived. Still, if they didn't mind putting in a bit of effort to make it a bit more livable, it would make a good weekend getaway. They were up for it, but they questioned why I'd never mentioned it before. It just never occurred to me. My parents and police searched for my grandfather everywhere, but no one was able to find him. And that was the reason why my parents never wanted me to go back to that cabin. But that was when I was a kid. Surely things would be different as an adult. It took a while for my parents to find the key to the place when I asked for it. Still, we eventually found it, and with a small amount of trepidation, they handed it over to me. Despite my grandfather's disappearance happening years ago, they were still worried about me going back. Several weeks later, we arrived at the cabin after the 3-hour drive it took us to get there. There was little I remembered about the location. The view was breathtaking. The ideal place to kick back for a week with friends, beers, and the grill. We unlocked the door and entered the property. The condition of the place was as you would imagine it being, after having been left abandoned for years since we left after the unsuccessful search for my grandfather. There was no one to take care of it. It was a pretty decent place, aside from the filth and lack of maintenance. I'm not sure why my parents never thought to sell it. I began to think that this might be an excellent project to fix up and get on an Airbnb. Get a bit of extra income coming in. We got the place cleaned up and in a livable condition. It wasn't perfect, but it was more comfortable than camping. And we were only here for a week. There was a generator we managed to get working, so we had power. As the afternoon turned into evening, we drank some beers and watched the sunset. It was perfect. Night fell, and we stayed outside for a while chatting about the usual nonsense. We gradually became more aware of the noise of the forest. For some reason, it was unsettling to the three of us. The natural sounds of the woods at night. Maybe we had just been used to the city for too long. We migrated to inside the cabin and played some music through a Bluetooth speaker I brought to drown out the noise from outside. It must have been about 1 a.m. when we all decided we had drunk enough to retire to our bedrooms. I took a room on the second floor, and David and Robert took rooms on the first floor. The windows were open from where we were airing out the place. The wind was picking up on the outside, so I shut them before going to bed. Due to the amount of alcohol sloshing around my veins, it took me no time to fall asleep. The beer brought me out of my sleep not long after, waking me up with a full bladder. I ventured to the bathroom and relieved myself. The window to the bathroom was still open, so I walked towards it to close it. However, before I got a chance to, I heard a voice from outside. I waited for a few moments, and then heard it again. Someone was calling my name. It sounded like David's voice. Or what would he be doing outside? And he sounded like he was in some sort of distress. Immediately, I ran to my room, grabbed a flashlight, and ran downstairs and out into the woods. I called out to David to try and pinpoint where the sound was coming from. The darkness and the thickness of the forest were disorientating, so I began to panic about getting lost. All of a sudden, something flew past my head. I froze for a moment, and then tried to chalk this up to David playing some sort of dumb trick on me. I called out to him, annoyed by this point. I heard no response. I noticed that the forest had all of a sudden fallen completely silent, as if all sound had been sucked out entirely. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of footsteps of something running towards me. I turned to run in the opposite direction of where I heard the sound coming from. I ran maybe 15 feet or so before I slammed straight into another body. It was David. Once we came to realize what had just happened, I asked him what he was doing outside this time of night. He then proceeded to tell me that he had come out because he heard my voice outside. Apparently, I had been calling out in distress, so he came to find and help me. David asked me what I was running away from, and I explained I heard something running towards me. We agreed it was best we didn't spend any more time outside and get back to the cabin. We got back and checked on Robert to see if he had heard anything, but his room was empty. We searched the cabin and couldn't find him anywhere. It dawned on us that it was a possibility that what had happened to David and me wasn't some sort of misunderstanding, but something more sinister. Was there someone trying to lure us into the forest? If so, how did they know our names? We grabbed our flashlights and headed out into the forest, calling out for Robert. After about 30 minutes of looking, we began to feel like our attempts to find him were futile. All of a sudden, we heard a scream, followed by our names being called out. It was Robert. He was in trouble. We ran towards the direction of the sound and found Robert cowering on the ground, covered in scratches. We asked him what had happened, and he told us he was woken up by the sound of my voice calling out to him. He went to David's room to notify him, but found it was empty. Thinking something was wrong, he came out looking for us. Finally, he located the source of the sound, and to his shock, he came to realize it wasn't coming from either of us, but from something else. Something he found difficult to describe other than it was not human. Before he even had the chance to figure out he had been deceived, this thing started to chase him. He began to run, but couldn't get enough distance from the thing. It caught up with him, got a hold of him, and attacked him despite his best efforts to fight the thing off. He screamed for help, and the sound of David and myself approaching seemed to scare it off. It ran into the forest. We shone our flashlights around to see if it was near, but didn't see anything. Robert wasn't injured so bad he couldn't walk. It looked like we managed to get there in time before anything terrible happened to him. We all agreed it wouldn't be a good time to hang around, so we made our way back to the cabin. It seemed to take us an age to get back. I was doing my best not to panic that we had gotten lost. Eventually, we saw the cabin and quickened our pace. Before we were out of the forest area, David, as quietly as possible, indicated all of us to stop and hide. It didn't take Robert and me long to realize what he had seen. The creature was outside the cabin. From what I could make out in the dark, it was tall, thin, with skin tight over its bones. It stood on its hind legs and had a hunched back. It was circling and looking in the windows. It approached the back door. It opened it. The thing knew how to open doors. It made its way inside. "What is it doing?" I whispered to David. He shrugged. I asked Robert if that was what attacked him, and he said he thought it was, but it was too dark to see. We waited in silence for what felt like an age. Eventually, I asked David what he thought we should do. He suggested waiting for it to leave. None of us wanted to spend the rest of the night outside, and what would we do if the thing never left? I took out my phone to call the police. No signal. In hushed tones, we discussed our options. We had one idea to distract it outside with a noise. But what if the person making the noise couldn't get away fast enough? Robert said the thing moved too quickly for a human on foot to escape from. We knew we had to get away from this place. Even if the thing left the cabin and we got inside, what was to say this thing couldn't figure out a way back in? I knew the only way to get out of this was for me to get in the cabin and get the keys to my truck. I knew I left them on the kitchen table. If I could get in and out without this thing noticing me, we could drive away from this place and come back with the authorities. This place belonged to my family, and it was my idea to bring my friends here. I had to get us out of here. I told the other two the plan and to wait by my truck. I saw a shadow in the window of the room that was my bedroom. It was upstairs. Now was my chance. I quickly made my way to the back patio door that led into the kitchen. I opened the door and snuck in, trying to make the least amount of sound possible. I used my flashlight to search for the keys. I was relieved when I saw the light reflect off the car badge on the unlocking device. Adrenaline overtook my body, and in the panic to grab the keys and get out of there, I knocked over some empty beer cans, causing them to crash to the ground. I instantly heard the thing start running out of my bedroom and down the stairs. I ran out the door, remotely unlocking the car, and shouted to the guys to get in. There was no point in being quiet about it now. I looked behind me. The thing burst out the door, and it was gaining on me. I made it to the driver's side, got in, and slammed the door shut behind me. The truck had a push button to start, so I wasted no time in getting it started. The creature slammed against the side of the vehicle. It retracted its arm as if it was about to strike the driver's side window, but I managed to get the truck moving and sped out of there. The creature followed, but despite its speed wasn't able to outrun the moving vehicle. We made our way to a nearby town. All of our belongings were left in the cabin, including our wallets. We weren't able to check into a hotel. That didn't matter. We were comfortable enough being back to civilization and in the safety of my truck. Daylight eventually came, and we concluded that perhaps the authorities would just think we were crazy. So, we ventured back to the cabin, comforted by the sunlight, and cautiously entered to gather our belongings and get out of there. I vowed never to return to that place. Story 3. My story starts with a waking nightmare. I woke up to this enormous creature standing by my bed, and I let out a scream. My parents rushed inside my room to check on me. It was the middle of the night, probably around 3 a.m., and I was shivering with fear. My mother touched my forehead, and, according to her, I was running a fever. So my parents stood next to me for about an hour, nursing me until I got back to sleep. I couldn't sleep, but I did not want them to stay up as well. So I just closed my eyes and pretended to sleep peacefully, so that they would just go back to their room. The following day, I dragged myself out of bed and freshened up as I went to the breakfast table. Startling me with a hug, my mother proceeded to tell me everything that had happened the previous night. It was just like her to make a big fuss over nothing. Being the overly protective mother, she was reluctant to give me permission to go to the Auckland jungle adventure that I was leaving for with school that morning. My dad convinced her she was worrying about nothing, and that everything would be fine. I dismissed her concerns. I was too excited to go on this trip, as it would be the last trip with school. After this, all of my friends were about to go our separate ways for uni. We were determined to make this an adventure to remember. When I arrived at school, my friends and teachers were already outside waiting for the bus to arrive. I joined my friends, Alison and John. We were all excited about the 2-day adventurous trip. The three of us had grown incredibly close over the 10 years we had known each other. All of my after-school activities were spent with these two. It was kind of upsetting that after spending a considerable part of our lives together, we were going to be going our separate ways. Anyway, the bus arrived, and we were all excited about the journey ahead. We may have had a 6-hour journey ahead of us, but when you're with friends like these, it would inevitably fly by. Before the end of the journey, about 3 miles before we reached the camp, we passed a tourist-style painted sign directing to a place called the Undiscovered Forest. Our bus driver, wanting to spin a good yarn, tells us the locals name the location because there lives a creature unknown to man that has prevented people from exploring the forest. The beast is so monstrous and devilish in nature, no one dares venture into the woods. People say the creature manifested due to a powerful supernatural presence in the mountains. Supposedly it is some sort of animal-like creature. However, due to the lack of interaction, people don't know much about it except that he devours human flesh. On the rare occasions that people have seen the creature, they never recovered psychologically and ended up in institutions. Far from scaring us into not wanting to go near the place, it ignited our curiosity. John and I each gave each other a look, knowing that exploring this location was definitely on the cards as soon as we got the chance. Alison caught sight of us and shook her head with a warning. She was always the sensible one. Shortly after, we arrived at the camp, unloaded our luggage and settled in. The teacher ran through the rules we were meant to abide by for our safety, and we were left to our own devices for the rest of the evening. As soon as we were out of earshot of everyone else, John and I discussed our plans for sneaking out and making our way to the undiscovered forest that night. Alison pleaded with us not to go, but she knew there was no stopping us. Once we had our minds set on an adventure, there was never any stopping us. She also knew it would be inevitable that we would persuade her to join us. We did everything together, and who would talk us out of doing anything really dumb? It was past midnight, and everyone was asleep. The three of us snuck out. It was surprisingly easy. We trekked along the 3-mile road back to that sign directing us to the road to the forest with nothing but our flashlights to illuminate the way. Once we found it, we started along the road to this unexplored location. The road quickly turned into a steep incline, and the further we got up, the thicker the snow covering the ground became. We approached a building on the left of the road, and our curiosity brought us closer to explore. It turned out to be nothing more than a cafe, diner, tourist shop type of place selling monster-themed gifts, meals, and drinks. "There you go," I said, trying to ease Alison's anxiety. Nothing more than an urban myth to attract tourists. The place was closed, so we explored the area a little, discussing how this would be cool to visit during the daytime. Alison wanted to head back, but John hadn't had his fix of a good scare, so he wanted to explore a little further down the road. Or in this case, up the road. Ignoring Alison's protests, we ventured on. After about 10 minutes of walking, we walked past a cabin that appeared dark and empty. By the condition, it could have been abandoned. We stood outside for a short while, debating on whether or not we should explore the place. As much as John and I were up for a thrill, getting into real trouble for breaking and entering a property someone may own definitely wasn't a good idea. We walked on a little further. But then, the wind picked up. Like, really picked up. There wasn't any indication of a storm coming in, but this seemed to come out of nowhere. Alison was the first to express her concern. After a few moments of consideration, John agreed it was probably a good idea to head back. So, we started on our way back. But this storm picked up so quickly it seemed like we weren't going to be back in time. It started to look like our only option would be to take cover in the cabin we had just passed. We fought through the wind and snow and managed to reach the door of the cabin. We knocked in case anyone was in there, but didn't wait long before trying the doorknob. It opened with ease, and we rushed inside, shutting the door behind us. The place was dark and empty. None of the lights worked, and it appeared to have been left unoccupied for a long time. Nevertheless, John reassured us that if the place was still standing in its current condition, we should be safe from the storm for the time being. The sound of the wind outside was deafening, and we held on to each other's hands to comfort each other. Then, as quickly as it came, the storm disappeared. We sat in silence for a short while. Finally, John slowly got up and walked to the door. He opened it and stepped outside. He returned with a look of concern about him. We asked him if everything was okay, and he said the storm appeared to be over, but it was almost as if it was too quiet. We all stepped outside, and John was right. There was no sound. Almost an absence of sound, as if the storm had extracted it when it went through. We didn't want to waste any time wondering what had happened and started on our way back to the camp as quickly as possible. We power walked down the road. Thankfully, it was only one road, so we didn't have any trouble retracing our steps back. We would have ran back, but we were worried we might fall over in the snow. Something caused me to look behind us. A noise. Something other than the sound of our footsteps in the snow. I turned to look, shining my flashlight in the direction of the noise. The light reflected off a figure, hairless, with bright white skin and yellow eyes. Once it noticed me looking, it ducked out of sight. I let out a gasp. "John," I shouted. Before I could say anything further, he responded with a, "I know. Keep moving." Alison began to panic. She hadn't seen anything, but seeing both John and myself spooked meant she knew we must be in some sort of real danger. We picked up our pace as fast as we could. It felt like a nightmare, wanting to run away from something but not being able to move fast enough. The sound of this thing chasing us got closer. It was gaining on us, hunting us. It seemed to take us forever to get back on the main road leading to the camp. Once we were there, the sound of whatever it was that was chasing us seemed to stop. It was almost as if the thing was reaching the end of its territory. The road began to clear from snow, and we were able to move quicker, breaking out into a run. We didn't want to stop and see what was following us. We got back to the camp out of breath, stopping before getting so close anyone could hear us. Once we caught our breaths, John and I began to laugh. It's funny how you react to things when you're genuinely terrified. Alison didn't find it at all funny, and wanted us to tell her what we thought we saw. We both described the same thing. Then, when we caught our breaths, we snuck back to our rooms on the site. The following day, we made the decision that was enough of a thrill for this trip. We decided to remain with the rest of the group for the remainder of the weekend. I have no idea what it was we saw, but I couldn't help think that the dream I had before the trip was some kind of warning. Thank you for watching and/or listening to this video. Again, if you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button, and if you don't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and select the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future uploads. Also, please leave a comment on this video letting me know what you thought of it. Comments really help with the YouTube algorithm and will really help my channel to grow. If you have a story you would like me to narrate, please email it to me at stories@daredeverell.com. A link is included in the video description. I'm getting close to my next major milestone of 100,000 subscribers to this channel. I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who is continuing to subscribe to this channel and contributing to its growth by liking videos and leaving comments. Once I get to 100,000 subscribers, my plan is to reward you all with an epic video with over 3 hours of original content. I'm thinking it'll be 3 hours of Wendigo or cryptid stories. If that is the sort of thing you want to hear, please keep helping this channel to grow. If you want to support my channel even further, there are a number of ways you can do so. You can consider leaving me a tip for this video via my PayPal. Link is included in the description. Check out my Teespring store and consider purchasing one of my shirt designs. I have a new design with a dogman, a Wendigo, a skinwalker and a Bigfoot, all on a zebra crossing. It's a must for anyone who likes these types of stories. Sometimes I get asked if I have done any audiobooks, and the answer to that is yes. On Audible there is a book Punch by J.R. Park that I narrated. I do get a small royalty if you decide to purchase that. It's a revenge/horror novel that was a lot of fun to narrate. I'd love to do some more in the future at some point. If this channel takes off as much as I hope it will, it'll afford me more time in the future to be able to work on such projects. Thank you all again for watching.